and welcome to the second episode of the Collab podcast. This one's going to be a bit ad hoc because the guest for this podcast is yours truly. I thought for the second episode, I would introduce myself a bit more in depth and kind of give you a backstory on how I got to where I am now. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So, I'm Jan Polonais. I'm a graphic designer based out of Krakow, Poland. And I've been doing design for 6 or 7 years now. Previously, I was based just north of London. And outside of, let's say, my day-to-day job of designing pretty much anything underneath the sun, I do a lot of sports. And I'm quite the automotive geek, as well as aviation. Basically, anything that's kind of a machine catches my attention to some extent. So to kind of start off, how did I even get into design? It definitely wasn't planned. I'd say it was kind of an accidental thing. I was doing lots of side projects, trying to start little businesses when I was young, and one of those I just opened up. I think at that point it was still called Adobe Express. And I just started doing some Instagram stories and leaflets off of designs from there. So, and that's kind of how I started to fall into it. And after a while, I kind of saw that I had a bit of a knack for it. I was always able to let's say, take templates and create somewhat interesting things with them. And that kind of led into how I finally transitioned to being able to call myself a graphic designer. My father kind of introduced me to the idea of selling my graphic design competencies on Fiverr, and I started on there, and that's what I ended up doing for about 2 years. I worked with, I think, 40 or 50 companies on Fiverr during that time. Looking back now, the designs I did weren't something I'd happily have on the internet, but I think it was an important part of the journey, and also learning how to work with clients and their needs, and also dealing with difficult clients, which is something that you sometimes do have to deal with when your client buys an ad for, well, not an ad, a social media post for $5 or $10. Sometimes they have slightly higher expectations than their budget allows. So, but I think it was a good thing to go through that. And after those 1.5 years, maybe 2, towards the end of my stint on Fiverr, I kind of started to look into the design community and see all of the cool things that other people were doing. And I guess being 16 years old at the time, I wanted to kind of be part of that. So I wanted to start my own agency and start working on those kind of projects, larger projects. So it was kind of more towards the end of those 2 years, after seeing what other designers were doing, and I think also seeing, I believe it was on Chris Doe's podcast, this 14-year-old designer from the UK who had already created their own, let's say, one-man design agency. I wanted to try my own hand at that, and that's kind of when the idea of a previous project that some of you may know called Gort Studio, it's had a few names over the past, how that started to formulate. In the beginning, that was supposed to be a one-man design agency where I'd be able to work with slightly bigger clients on slightly larger projects like brand identities and so on and so forth. And I think it was during the start of that when I started to make like Instagram carousels and maybe even a few reels when they first came out. And that's kind of how I got into this whole idea of creating educational content online. And that was my first, let's say, taste of that. And kind of once I got a taste for how it feels to be able to share that knowledge and sometimes see how people enjoy things that you shared. I think that's something that stuck with me till now and something I'm continuing to do. And while I was doing that, let's say getting more and more into the educational content, I still worked a bit on Fiverr, but I was slowly pulling back on that as I kind of just didn't like the type of clients I was getting and what they wanted from me. And I managed to be able to do, I think, 1 or 2 slightly larger projects, brand identity, logos, and such. And I think back then, I was 16 or 17, I was going through my GCSEs or IGCSEs. And at that point, I was going through my IGCSEs, so kind of the focus on doing all that educational content and graphic design, as well as other things around that, kind of went a bit onto the back burner, as well as I think I had at that time a focus on becoming a pilot. So yeah, it was just a kind of slow down period, I guess, when I was like 16 or 17. And then at the age of 17, I had quite a large life event in that I moved to Poland with my family, and that's how I ended up here in Krakow. After the move, I was able to continue working on Gortz, pushing out more and more stuff, learning how to become a better designer, mostly through copying other people's work and trying to reproduce it, create new versions of it, and basically watching as many Chris Do or other creators in the graphic design space. And I think not long after I turned 18 was kind of when I wanted to give a shot at going into becoming an in-house designer. Before that, the idea of being an in-house designer I didn't think was really on the cards, because most companies wouldn't really be able to hire a 15, 16-year-old to do graphic design at their company. And I think at the age of about 18, after I turned 18, it was this time when I kind of wanted to try switching over from this kind of freelance that I'd been doing for those 3-4 years over to something more in-house, something where I could work on a project long term, instead of just being kind of this person that came in to do a logo, to do a brand identity, and then maybe a few assets later, but never something kind of long term where you actually get to sit in the weeds and work on something where, you know, simply certain effects are only to be seen after a while and not immediately. And this led to basically the big conundrum of most designers trying to create a portfolio. I think during that year of trying to look for work, I think I went through like 3 iterations of my portfolio, updating it, re-updating it, trying to figure out what was good and what needed improvement. And I think during that time, I would say that the Futures content, and by extension Chris Do's content, was really helpful in kind of pushing myself. And I think some of his advice has still stuck with me till today. I do like his no bullshit approach to design and some of the problems that are encountered in graphic design. And it was about after a year, after going through a few interview processes, some more lengthy than others, that I finally landed at a marketing company based in Poland, quite a large one, working in their marketing team. So that was a bit of inception there. That was a very good decision, and a very, well, I must say, lucky in some ways company to land out, because the people I work with are very talented, and there is a lot of, let's say, pushing you in that team that I that I get to experience, and it makes sure that I didn't just join the company and kind of stay where I was. I was pushed to become better. And one of the ways that I was pushed was to not only increase my graphic skills, but also my art direction skills. I think that was something that I hadn't really looked at or been opened to in my journey before. So that was quite helpful. And I think during that time, I also had the chance to join Tomek Biskup's course with design practice, which I have to admit was probably one of the biggest boosts in my design ability and design career. It really pushed my abilities on what is good design, how do you do good design, how do you art direct, and how do you focus on the user experience, which is something I think for any of the brand identity courses that I'd seen before was something that was touched on in the sense of like you have your users and such, but I never saw a correlation between creating those users and also thinking about how, let's say, the end user experience would be for that brand, which I think is something that especially now is coming more and more towards the front. More and more companies are looking at how people interact with their brands, and not so much in the sense of like do they buy and so on, but what is the culture around the brand. I think that's why you see so many, let's say, even sports brands creating these running clubs and so on and so forth. It's to kind of create this club or brand experience that isn't just buying a product. And at the end of that first course with Tomek Biskup, there were 10 people that were given, let's say, this distinction for their project that they had given as part of the end of course homeworks. And I didn't get into that. I didn't get that in that course. I did get a honorable mention, and receiving that honorable mention kind of gave me a fire in my stomach, so to speak. Because firstly, it showed that yes, there was this artistic potential, because I was quite creative when I was younger, and that creativity did correlate into graphic design. But it also showed me that I still had a lot of room to grow and become better. And I think it also pushed me even harder in the second course that he released with design practice, which was called Interaction Designer, if I remember correctly, where I did manage to get a distinction, and I was quite proud of that when I got it, because it was just the first ever award I'd received graphic design wise. There was a lot of late nights related to that one. But I think it was worth it. So basically, yeah, if Tomek, you're listening, thanks for all your courses. And I would say because of those courses, I grew quite a lot as a designer. But also meeting all the people involved with those courses has really expanded my horizons. I've made a lot of good friends through that community. And I think it had a big part in how I became the designer I am today, and the things I see, the things I notice when I am designing. And it was kind of after that, in the last, let's say, two years, that due to the community that I kind of started to find through those courses, I was able to start doing these design meetups, which at the start was just literally free people having dinner, just talking about graphic design and kind of changing out ideas and such. And it's kind of grown into this larger thing where it's a group, I think, of at least 40 people on a group chat, and we try to organize meetups relatively regularly. So though there are sometimes dry spots in those meetups, though there are sometimes longer periods without meetups, though I think that is definitely something I would recommend to any designer, no matter where you are, is do those kind of meetups. You really meet a lot of people that you otherwise wouldn't meet, and it also kind of shows you that a lot of people are on different, let's say, stages of their design career. No matter if that's earlier or later, you get to see that it's not just people who are amazing and do really good work. It's also people who are just starting out and trying to figure out how to become better designers. And I think that could be quite helpful. It allows you also to help those people or to talk with people who are more experienced than you. It just allows for an exchange of knowledge and also sometimes even work. Like sometimes somebody needs help with something and they've met you, they've seen you, they've talked to you, and that can bring you real work. It's why people keep telling you on LinkedIn to do networking, even though it's probably the most overused word on that platform, networking, but it does actually bring effects. That's how most people get work. It's because they know somebody. It's because they've chatted with somebody. You know that person. People want to generally work with people they like, and the more friends you can make, I think the stronger your design career can become, and generally your life and so on. And to cut a long story short, that's how I got to where I am now. And this kind of led me to where I am now, which is a graphic designer that is competent and can do things in InDesign, which is not a software I particularly enjoy using. Thank you, Wojtek, for your help in teaching me how to use that. To things that I enjoy quite a lot more, like UI design in Figma or creating websites in Framer, which is something quite new to my skill set, but something that I'm working on actively. And I think over the last, let's say, 6 months, after some self-reflection, which sounds very self-helpy and Instagram reel and self-help books and so on, but I guess there's no other really better word for it. I wanted to restart what I'd been doing with Gortz, because over those previous 3 years, I think that's kind of when I started to do things around that. I joined a mastermind during that period, which kind of helped put my, let's say, large amount of ideas into a more structured format. It also led to the name change to what is now FreeSense, kind of a play on giving your 2 cents on something, but I wanted to be just a bit extra, and trying to put out more stuff along those lines, because it was something that I'd been doing for quite a long time and to some extent enjoyed, though I definitely wanted to find a better way of doing it, which is why I now switched over to these podcasts and maybe shorts and so on and so forth, because I do find it a bit easier to just kind of talk with people. I think you get a lot more value out of that. You are able to also build up those relationships, which can also be helpful in the future. And I found that a lot more appealing than trying to constantly have to come up with ideas for carousel posts and so on and so forth, because writing, if I have to be honest, is not my favorite thing to do on the weekend. And yeah, so moving forward with FreeSense, I just kind of want to use it as a testing bed, keep on creating the content. I think the podcast is something that suits me, suits how I want to do things, and it also fits into, say, the time that I have for this side project. So yeah, that's all on FreeSense. So yeah, that's all I have to say on that topic. And I think just generally moving forward is to constantly be doing. I think that's something that's always helped me is to just constantly be doing something around design, testing, trying something, because it's allows you to play in some way. It allows you to test and play and do things that maybe aren't the most productive, but in some way become the most productive because they allow you to test something that in, let's say, a commercial project you'd never get to be able to test because it would just be kind of a waste of time to some extent. So yeah, if that was, let's say, the best piece of advice I could give at the end of this episode, it would be to just play. It's something that's helped me a lot in my career. It's just playing around with things, testing things, trying things, and also talking to people. Get out there and do a design meetup to go out there and be like, hey, I'm going to book a restaurant for X amount of people. I'm going to ask all these people to come and do that. It's more than worth it because you actually get to meet all of those people behind those profile icons and behind those designs that you get to see on Instagram and Behance and so forth. And you actually get to put a face to those names, which I think is something that's in these times probably one of the most invaluable assets that we can talking like a like a wealth fund manager. One of the best things that you can add to your life. It's having those connections with people. So yeah, I think I've been talking for 45 minutes now, so I'm going to stop my rambling and make a cup of tea. So if you enjoyed this, it was a bit of a ad hoc podcast. There wasn't really much of a script. I just had some notes. So if it sounded like rambling, it's because it was. I hope it did have a bit of sense, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you enjoyed the podcast, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment or whatever floats your boat, to let me know that the stuff I'm putting out is interesting for you guys.